Good morning. On Tuesday, Howell Emanuel Donaldson was arrested on 4 counts of first-degree murder. First, let me commend Chief Dugan and all the men and women of the Tampa Police Department, along with all the other law enforcement agencies, for working so hard to investigate the Seminole Heights killings. We also want to thank our steadfast community members and all the individuals who embrace their civic duty by providing information to law enforcement to help catch the perpetrator. The community's cooperation saved lives. Our office has been working with law enforcement since the first killing. Now that Mr. Donaldson has been arrested, the integrity of this case rests with our office. Going forward, this office has 2 goals. First and foremost, to prosecute this case to the fullest extent of the law, to hold the defendant accountable and to seek justice for his crimes. And second, to keep the public informed by providing as much information as we can. However, while the prosecution is pending, I won't be able to answer many of your questions. Not because we don't have the answers, but because it's my duty to protect the integrity of this process to ensure that justice is done. So although I'm not able to discuss specific facts or details or strategies, I promise to be as transparent as possible during the process. We have some of the best homicide prosecutors in the state of Florida here in this office, and I, along with them, will be working every detail of this case. We've been diligently evaluating the evidence and continuing the investigation as we prepare to bring charges. We intend to charge the defendant with 4 counts of first-degree murder, which requires bringing the case before the grand jury to obtain an indictment. This morning, the defendant had his initial appearance in court, and for the community's safety, we are seeking that the defendant be held without bail during the trial. The defendant has a right to a hearing before he's detained pre-trial, and the judge has scheduled that hearing for next Tuesday. These are the initial steps in a long process, from arrest to indictment to trial to conviction to sentence. I have great confidence in our criminal justice system, and we value the trust in and patience with that process as we work to prosecute this defendant and achieve justice for the victim, for their families, and for the entire community. And to the victims' families, to the residents of Seminole Heights, to the business owners and employees who work there, and to our entire community, I want to say again plainly and clearly, we will prosecute this case to the fullest extent of the law. As we move from the investigation to the prosecution phase, let us be mindful of the victims and their families, to respect their privacy and their mourning, and to keep them in our thoughts and prayers. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Mr. Warren, I know that you said it's early and you can't talk about strategy, but the number one question the families had yesterday, as I spoke to them, is if the facts in this case warrant it, will you pursue the death penalty?
I'm as shocked and angry as the entire community, and my heart goes out to the victims and their families. The death penalty should be reserved for the worst of the worst offenders in our society. And generally speaking, a serial killer would qualify. But it is my duty to follow the law. When I was sworn in as state attorney, I put my hand on the Bible and took an oath to uphold the Constitution and the laws of Florida. And that oath is sacred. So consistent with my duties as state attorney, I will evaluate all the aggravating and mitigating evidence in this case to determine whether there is a legal basis to seek the death penalty under U.S. Supreme Court and Florida law. And if the case satisfies the legal requirements, and if it's consistent with what the defendant, the victim's families want, then we will seek the death penalty. Now, when I took office, I put in place a process to thoroughly and diligently evaluate all the available evidence before making a decision about whether to seek the death penalty. In this case, like every other case that this office has handled over the past 11 months, we'll go through that process to make sure that I'm faithfully executing my duty to follow the law.
Mr. Warren, you've said in the past if mental illness played a factor, you would not pursue the death penalty. If that comes up in this case, is that something that you would say you take off the table?
We have to consider all the statutory aggravating and mitigating factors, and mental illness is one of them. It is just one factor to be considered in making the legal determination.
Is his age in and of itself enough of a mitigator, because he's less than 25, to take the death penalty off the table?
The defendant's age is another factor. If the defendant were under 18, then the death penalty would be off the table. But he's not in this case, and so we will consider the defendant's age along with other factors that we are statutorily required to evaluate and consider.
Are you confident that you have the evidence to prove first-degree murder and that you have the right man?
As a prosecutor, we would never bring charges unless we had good faith belief and confidence that we had evidence to sustain conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. Even though the standard to bring charges is only probable cause, and probable cause will be the standard on which the grand jury makes their determination to indict, we would not bring charges unless we have good faith belief that the evidence is sufficient to sustain a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt.
Did you obtain warrants for cell phone surveillance prior to this week?
I'm not at liberty to discuss strategies of the investigation or specific facts about how we arrived and arrested Mr. Donaldson.
Are you concerned about the Supreme Court's consideration of cell phone location pinging, as it played a big role in this case?
There are going to be a lot of legal issues that come up during this case, just like with any case, and especially with any capital case. And that's why we have such a great team of prosecutors here who will be handling those legal arguments.
Mr. Warren, did you have a chance to speak to the family this morning? And if so, did they express what they want or what type of punishment they would like to see to you?
I was able to meet with the victims' families this morning prior to the initial appearance. But my conversations with the victims and with the victims' families is between the victims' families and myself.
Can you say just what you said?
I explained to them the process that would happen this morning. I talked to them about how this office stands squarely behind them, that we have prosecutors available to answer their questions, that we have 3 victim witness advocates available to help them through the process, that I am personally available for them during this process, and that we're in the process now of scheduling a meeting where we can sit down with all the victims' families and discuss how the process is going to work and their wants and desires. And that's not going to be a one-time conversation. That's an ongoing dialogue as this case proceeds in the coming weeks, months, and years.
Mr. Warren, we understand that there's sealed documents in New York City that date back to 2014 for Donaldson, and we're wondering if this office has sealed those. Is there any connection? Is there any connection to those records and the killings here in Tampa?
Again, I can't comment on specific evidence in the case at this point. We're still preparing to bring charges against the defendant. In order to protect the integrity of the process, I'm not at liberty to comment on that.
In the interest of transparency, can you guarantee that the people of Seminole Heights will have access to the public records and the documents? Can you make them available free of charge to them so that they can follow the case and see what's happening?
We will be as transparent as possible to make sure that the entire community understands what's going on. And of course, we have the Sunshine Law in Florida that we diligently follow here to make sure that there's transparency and trust in the process.
Do you have any physical evidence that links the defendant to these crimes?
You have available the criminal report affidavit, as well as the motion that was filed to detain the defendant. Outside of what's contained in those documents, I'm not going to comment on specific evidence for the reasons I've already stated.
From talking to the neighbors who lived in the area where he grew up, where Donaldson grew up, one of the things that they're very skeptical about is how quickly the police moved to make the arrest and how quickly these charges came forward. Can you speak about that? Just how quickly, to charge someone with first-degree murder, the bar, like you said, is really high, and at least his community is concerned that the process was too quick. And that's why the question is, are you confident that there is going to be physical evidence that links this man to the killings?
There was 51 days from the first killing to the arrest. 3 additional killings during that time. Our law enforcement community, led by Chief Dugan with Tampa Police, has been working with this office, with the FDLE, with the sheriff, with federal, state, and local officials. This was a massive operation coordinated by Tampa Police. This was not a quick process by any means. Also, keep in mind, no charges have been filed yet in this case. The formal charging occurs when the case is brought before the grand jury and indictment is returned.
I should clarify my question. My question is regarding the amount of time between the police taking the suspect from the McDonald's to getting questioned, to him getting an arrest, and the presentation from the police saying that they felt confident that this was the individual who was responsible for these killings.
The police makes an arrest based upon a probable cause determination, based on all the information that they have available to them over the past 51 days at the time of the arrest. As I said before, we take that probable cause determination and elevate it to a higher standard, whether we have sufficient evidence to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt before we'll bring it to the grand jury or before we'll file any charges in the case.
Kind of piggybacking on her, with regards to the information that was released in that affidavit, it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, would you agree that that was a significant amount of physical evidence that was there on his person they were able to recover fairly quickly?
And I'm not going to comment on the volume of the evidence.
Mm-hmm.
The evidence that's been made public is contained in those documents.
Just
Do you
one
have
more
a
question on
specific
this.
message?
On the death penalty question, do you feel in any case that it's appropriate to bring the death penalty forward?
Yes. As I've said before many times, the death penalty should be reserved for the worst of the worst offenders. In the 11 months I've been in office, we've sought the death penalty on 3 cases. And to be crystal clear on this case, if after a determination of the factors in this case, it meets the legal requirements for under the death penalty and it's consistent with what the victims' families want, we will seek the death penalty.
Have you spoken to Governor Scott, and if so, what type of conversation have you all had?
I have not.
What's the timeline like for presenting this to a grand jury?
From the date of arrest, we have 21 days, so that would expire, if my math is correct, on December the 19th, which would be 2 weeks from Tuesday.
And what is presented to them in order to make that determination?
Evidence in order for them to return an indictment. So their standard is probable cause, and I'm happy to explain the grand jury process if you'd like.
Please do so.
Yeah, briefly, yeah.
Grand jury is composed of 15 to 21 individuals from Hillsborough County. They sit here in this jurisdiction for 6-month terms that can be extended up to 90 days. Typically, the grand jury meets once a week, depending on whether we have cases or investigations to present before them. So the grand jury will convene. We will present information sufficient to obtain an indictment and let the grand jury deliberate and then return a true bill, at which point the defendant is formally charged with the crimes.
Do you believe any additional charges could be added on?
We're not going to discuss the strategy at this point. I've said we intend to bring charges for the 4 first-degree murders against the defendants, 1 for each of the 4 killings.
Technically, until the grand jury returns its decision, is he still charged with these crimes?
He has not been charged yet.
So he won't be charged until there's a true bill?
Correct. In the state of Florida, you cannot charge someone with a capital offense without an indictment returned by a grand jury.
What's the legal basis for holding him until that time? Like to detain him without the formal charges? Just curious.
He's been arrested on 4 counts of first-degree murder.
Okay.
He was held today without bond until he can have a pretrial hearing of detention,
Okay.
at which point the judge will make a determination whether he will be detained pretrial throughout the pendency of the process.
Okay.
Any message you'd like to share with the family who may be concerned on whether or not justice is going to be served at the end of this case?
So we will do everything we can in this office. We will use all the available resources of the office. We will rely on the experience of the prosecutors in this office in order to hold the defendant accountable and seek justice for the crimes that he's committed.
The defendant was wearing a green jumpsuit type of thing. Is he on suicide watch?
The defendant's attire in his initial appearance this morning is determined by the jail in which he's held. So he's being held at Hillsborough County Jail. They determine what to put him in based on factors that they analyze. Typically, the defendants wear different colored attire based on the severity of the charges.
Are you aware of any suicide watch
not at liberty to disclose that information this morning.
We'll take one more question. That's it?
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.